So today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go deep in the Hammer Vault from 53 years ago. The movie that was almost banned in the North Shore because before it came out, a lot of the people said there was the first pornography-laden Hammer movie. And it didn't have any pornography. It was all rumors. So Scars of Dracula was R-rated for obvious reasons. Now, Scars of Dracula came out in 1970, directed by Roy Ward Baker for Hammer Films. It stars the great Christopher Lee as Count Dracula, along with a stellar cast including Dennis Waterman, Jenny Hanley, Patrick Troughton, and Michael Gwynn. Although disparaged by some critics, the film does restore a few important elements of Bram Stoker's original character. The Count is introduced as a nicely charming host. He has command over nature, and he's even scaling the walls of his castle. This is a trope that was really brought forth by Francis Ford Coppola as well with Bram Stoker's Dracula. It also gives Lee more to do and say than any other Hammer Dracula film, except his first, 1958's Dracula 22 years before. Now, in the opening scene, Count Dracula's remains are seen lying on a stone plinth in the chamber in his castle. The chamber can be accessed only through the window set behind his castle wall. It is not explained why his remains are at the castle or he came to die there. Suddenly, a large bat flies in and hovers over the plinth, regurgitating blood onto the Count's remains. Almost immediately, the remains start to interact and bond with the dripped blood. Within seconds, Dracula is once more resurrected. We really don't know why that blood would do it. Was it from a person or an animal or whatever? Now, soon afterwards, local villagers are enraged that yet another young woman has been murdered by the Count. With a priest's blessing, they rise up and set fire to Dracula's castle, which is kind of bizarre because it's a concrete one. However, Dracula is safely asleep in his solid stone chamber. When the villagers return home, they find that every single woman in the village has been slaughtered in a church by vampire bats. Elsewhere, libertine Paul Carson is falsely accused of rape and flees the Kleinburg authorities by jumping in a nearby coach, which, though driverless, heads off on great speed. After breaking through the border guard, he is knocked off the coach and stumbles into an inn, persuading the waitress Julia to let him in. The innkeeper, the same man from the prologue, interrupts them, though, and throws Paul out. Walking the forest, he finds the driverless coach of Dracula, which the returning Clove, Dracula's servant, drives back to the castle. Initially, Paul is welcomed by the Count and a beautiful woman named Tanya, who later reveals herself to be imprisoned by Dracula as his mistress. Paul later has a liaison with Tanya, who concludes their lovemaking by trying to bite his neck. Dracula appears and, casually throwing off Paul's effort to stop him, savagely stabs Tanya through the heart with a silver dagger for betraying him. Silver kills vampires. He then stoops over to drink the blood from the wounds of her dead body. Very dramatic scene. Dracula sends his servant Clove, dismembers her body, and dissolves the pieces in a bath of acid. Locked in a room behind the castle, Paul uses tied-together bed curtains to climb down to a tower window, but his line is withdrawn by Clove, and he finds himself in the Count's chamber. Now, Paul's more sober brother Simon and Simon's fiancée Sarah come searching for him. A maid at the tavern directs him to the castle, and they investigate. Dracula immediately has designs on a lovely Sarah, but Clove, who was fallen in love with the young woman after seeing her photograph amongst Paul's possessions, helps the young couple escape by refusing to do Dracula's bidding and remove Sarah's crucifix. The servant pays a terrible price for his disobedience, as he is sadistically burnt by Dracula with a red-hot cutlass. Simon, having listened to help of the village priest, goes back to the castle to look for Paul. However, the priest is attacked and killed by a large vampire bat, and Simon is betrayed by Clove, ending up in the same doorless and inescapable room as his brother. Opening the coffin in the middle of the room, Simon discovers the sleeping Dracula, but the vampire's power reaches through his closed eyelids, causing the young man to collapse before he can take action against the Count. Now, this is all in a 95-minute movie, and it goes fast. Now, when Simon recovers, the vampire has vanished. Investigating the room further, he's horrified to find his brother's drained corpse on a spike. Looking out of the window, Simon is amazed to see the Count running up the wall outside like an insect, which, of course, that's a trope with Bram Stoker's version. With a rope let down by Clove, Simon climbs up the sheer outer wall to go after Sarah, knowing that Dracula may use her as his new mistress. Sarah, meanwhile, has made her way back to the castle battlements as the storm approaches. Suddenly, she's confronted by Dracula, who this time uses his bat familiar to remove her crucifix. Now, as it stands now, the just then, Clove arrives on the battlements and attacks the Count with the dagger the vampire used to murder Tanya, but his servant is hopelessly outmatched by the vampire's inhuman strength and is thrown over the side of the castle. Simon arrives on the scene, removes a loose metal spike from the castle's battlements, and throws it at Dracula, intending to pierce the vampire's heart. The spike pierces the Count's lower torso, missing his heart. Unharmed, Dracula races the spike to impale Simon, but of all things, struck by lightning, and Dracula is immediately engulfed in flames. Staggering in agony, the Count collapses and topples over the castle's battlements, falling to the ground far below, where his corpse continues to burn fiercely, and of course, leaves it open-ended. Now, this is distributed by MGM EMI and Continental Films. Release date was November 8, 70, 95 minutes. Budget for this, get this, £200,000, which is sort of $600,000 in Canadian money at the time. But I like the cast because it's tremendous. Now, it shows up in TCM quite often, but for me, I remember seeing it in French on the old Show TV, or what you call Channel 5 back in the day. Dennis Waterman plays Simon Carlton, Christopher as Dracula, Han Lee as Sarah Frameson, Christopher Matthews as Paul Carson, Patrick Troughton as Clove, Anuska Heppel as Tanya, a very beautiful lady, Michael Ripper, what a name as the landlord, Michael Gwynn as the priest, Wendy Hamilton as Julie, Delia Lindsay as Alice, Bob Todd as Burgomaster, and Toke Townley as elderly Wagner. Now, the film was shot in Hertford and made at Elstree in England. Now, the film breaks the continuity maintained through the previous entries in the Hammer Dracula film series, whereas at the end of the preceding film, Taste of the Blood of Dracula, the Count met his end in a disused church near London. But this film opens with a resurrection scene in Dracula's castle in Transylvania, with no explanation how his ashes got there. Furthermore, in Scars of Dracula, the Count has a servant named Clove, played by Patrick Troughton. In the third film of the series, Dracula Prince of Darkness, Dracula has a servant named Clove, played by Philip Lothman, who appears to be a different character, though identically named. The disruption of continuity caused by Scars of Dracula reflects the fact the film was originally tooled as a possible reboot of the series in the event Christopher Lee elected not to reprise the role of Dracula. Now, the British film group EMI took over distribution of the film after Warner Brothers refused to finance and distribute it. It was also the first of several Hammer films to get an R rating. This is a hard R. It doesn't have nudity, but my God, some of the deaths here just ooh. Now, the film was released on DVD by Anchor Bay Entertainment in 2004. It was also released in some markets on a double feature with the horror of Frankenstein. Now, this version from Anchor Bay is currently out of production. It's since been released as part of the Ultimate Hammer Collection DVD range. The disc also features a running commentary with Lee and director Roy Ward Baker, hosted by Marcus Hearn, co-author of the Hammer story. Also revealing are Baker's anecdotes of his arguments with BBFC executive at that time, John Trevelyan. The running time has long been erroneously stated as being up to 96 minutes, usually 95 in most books, including the book, The Hammer Story. It is in fact short of 92 minutes, listed on the Thorn EMI PAL VHS release of the 1980s. Anchor's Bay release has it correctly at 91 minutes. Now, in 2019, the film was re-released in the US on Blu-ray by Scream, with special features, including one that discuss the making of the film. Now, I saw it. I give it 2.5 out of 4. Not that it was a bad movie. It was just basically too violent for me, because usually Dracula is subtle. Now, reviews from critics have been negative. Howard Thompson, New York Times, reviewing the film along with the other half of the double bill, Horror Frankenstein, stated audience should avoid Scars of Dracula like the plague, calling it garish, gory junk. Kevin Thomas of the LA Times wrote that the film simply revs up one of the most familiar Dracula plots with sex and violence, adding, given something to work with, as in The Vampire Lovers, director Roy Ward Baker can turn out an excellent film. But really all he managed to do here is keep things moving. Now, the monthly film bulletin called it one of the weaker films in the Hammer cycle. For Dracula, explained that most of the film is padded out with very dull and by now routine filler material, besides some rather unnecessary sadism. Even a normally powerful resurrection sequence is dealt with hastily before the credits, so there is far too little of Christopher Lee and far too much of the various young leads. You see, and this is the problem with the title. You could call it Revenge of Dracula, but Scars of Dracula is the puncture in the neck a scar. It's a puncture. It's not a scar, because it will heal. So it won't leave a scar. So like the title made absolutely no sense. Now, Author Lyndon W. Jocelyn, his book Count Dracula Goes to the Movies, reviewing the many film adaptations of Dracula, wrote, "The plummet in quality that had been threatening the Hammer Dracula series for years finally came to pass with Scars of Dracula, a garish live-action cartoon. John Kennedy Muir in the horror films of the 1970s called the film a by-the-number sequel that amply demonstrates why the studio's audience was shrinking as the 1960s became the 1970s. But then again, get this. In 1986, the Turner Entertainment Company purchased pre-May 1986 MGM films, including Scars of Dracula for UK release, now owned by Warner Brothers, through Turner Entertainment only in the UK. So it is a Hammer movie, but obviously you can't compare with the original Dracula, and no Peter Cushing to battle Christopher Lee. Now, Dracula AD 1970 follow up, but continuity was very strong of the Hammer Dracula fans. Now, this movie itself, you rarely see it on non-Turner controlled networks, but for some reason, for 5 consecutive weeks, they were showing Hammer movies in French on Show TV, or what is TVR right now, Channel 5, in Northern New Brunswick. And let me tell you something. The French dub is much better than the English dub. I've seen people tell me about this movie in English. It doesn't have as much power for some reason. And it's in Quebecois French, which is quite interesting for like an early movie. It might have been dubbed in maybe 72 or 73. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's our latest. We haven't done one in a while. I'm sorry we haven't. In our Hammer reviews. If you like what we're doing here, we're our vintage horror movies. Not Jane Fonda movies. That's horror movies. Let us know what to like, comment, subscribe, or share. And don't forget, requests are always highly appreciated and always highly considered. And by the way, giving me a down vote if you don't like what I'm talking about, it's the truth. Like some of my podcasts last couple of days, you can't stop the truth. This could have been a terrible movie. It could have been a great movie, and it was just So that's the truth, or the tooth, as we call it. 2 teeth, get it? Thanks for listening. Bye.